Hello, this is Darrell Castle with today's Castle Report. This is Friday, the 31st day of July in the year of our Lord 2026. I will be talking about the testimony, or better said, the refusal to give testimony of Doctor Anthony Fauci, who was the director of the National Institute of Health Division of Allergy and Infectious Disease for about 30 years, especially during the COVID years. He finished his medical residency in the 1960s, and he has been a government bureaucrat since then. Yes, Dr. Fauci, who famously remarked when told that we should follow or stick to the science, said, quote, "I am the science," end quote. For years, it seems, Senator Rand Paul had been trying to get Dr. Fauci to testify before his Senate committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, but the science steadfastly refused. Finally, Senator Paul was able to persuade the members of his committee to issue a subpoena, and that compelled the science to show up at the hearing with his team of lawyers. Senator Paul had to have his lead attorney escorted out of the hearing by security because he was being disruptive and acting like his narcissistic client. President Biden issued, or rather his auto pen issued, a pardon to Fauci for any crimes he may have committed during the last 10 years. In other words, a preemptive pardon in case some charging agency somewhere down the line decided to indict him for, say, mass murder. The committee obviously knows he can't be charged for the crimes he may have committed, so what was the purpose of the subpoena? The purpose was to put him in a position to do one of two things, but he was unwilling to do either. Either he would admit to some of the most horrible crimes in American history, none of which could bring prosecution, or he would lie about them under oath, which would constitute the crime of perjury, and that is a new crime for which he has not been pardoned. Here's the opening statement from the science, read as part of his opening attack on Senator Paul. Quote, "Although it pains me to do so, because of the respect I have for the legislative branch for government and my decades-long record of cooperating with Congress under the advice of my attorneys, I will invoke my right under the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution to refrain from answering your questions," end quote. So he told them that he would not testify or answer any questions at all. When Senator Josh Hawley got his turn to ask questions, he asked him, "What day is today?" The science simply repeated the above quote. Senator Hawley said, "Let me be clear, you have no Fifth Amendment protection because you were pardoned." But obviously the senator got a little carried away because a pardon does not take away the Bill of Rights. It even protects those for whom it has been nothing more than toilet tissue for their years of government service. However, it is an opening question as to whether a person can be compelled to give answers to questions about crimes for which he cannot be prosecuted. The real problem with all this is a class of people who know they are completely above the law. Nothing they do, no matter how evil, can ever reach them. Apparently, they view the rest of us as sheep to be sheared. When these folks look in the mirror, they're very happy with what they see. Fauci was one of the highest paid government employees in history, still receives the highest pension, still receives lifetime Secret Service protection. He's quite aware of his untouchability. The hearing followed the release of a diary that Dr. Fauci kept personally during the COVID nightmare. Yes, folks, this man is so incredibly egotistical that he kept a written record of his crimes. How did Rand Paul, Senator Paul, come to have possession of Fauci's private diary? Well, Fauci, he was so confident that he was untouchable, he put his diary on a government server. Senator Paul released the diary to the public, and social media ran with it, but interestingly, mainstream media did not. The diary is more than 1,000 pages of private thoughts and is now a permanent record of the pandemic's entire existence. It presents this so-called expert in a very unfavorable light. I'm not surprised he didn't want to talk about it. He knows his media friends will cover for him, as they always have. He comes across as one who was very aware of his growing celebrity and the adept way that he learned to play the game of Washington politics, he seemed to understand how to play President Trump, and that the president didn't have the confidence to fire him. The science was preoccupied, even in dire moments for the nation. Preoccupied his growing fame. There are multiple entries recorded in his own writing of his adoration, pictured in the media coverage. He made notes of each flattering article, for example, quoting the science from his comments about a Washington Post article published in May of 2020. Quote, "It's not hyperbole to say that today I am the most famous and talked about person in the country and one of the most recognizable persons in the world," end quote. Some of his proudest moments were regarding calls or meetings he had with adoring celebrities. Comments such as, "Great call," with Barbara Streisand, in which he gave her advice on the mRNA vaccine. He also made note of his interactions with Julia Roberts, Steph Curry, many other celebrities. It all concludes with his embrace of Hunter Biden at the Kennedy Center Honors Night, with a special note about what he thought the reaction to the photo would cause. My guess is he did not tell Miss Streisand that 5 months after he had the vaccine, he had a myocardial infarction, which I believe is doctor speak for heart attack. Well, folks, that's enough about the good doctor's ego. What did he record of actual substance? On January 26, 2020, he wrote that epidemiological and genomic data showed the first infection occurred in early December and was unconnected to the Wuhan market. Now we know the market was not the source, he said. Now we know the market was not the source, it was the amplifier. To me, that's an admission that he knew the source was not natural but lab produced. That is, despite his years of statements that he was certain it was of natural origin. He recorded his now famous conference call with other members of the science of virology. Only 2 of them believed it had a natural origin. The rest thought it was, quote, deliberate insertion was possible. They discussed the possibility of accidental or deliberate release by a lab as the source. He knew all that time it was lab grown. He had financed its gain of function using your money to do so. Doctors and scientists tell us, excuse me, folks, doctors and scientists tell us that gain of function occurs when there is an existing virus which is harmless, usually doesn't jump from animals to humans. That virus is then combined with another virus in a lab, creating a new virus completely. That virus, much more dangerous, much more transmissible. Thus, it has gained in function. These horrible crimes for which normal people across the world suffered terribly were all pardoned by President Biden, or were they? Whether or not the auto pen was an actual pardon is an ongoing question. Here's the quote from the clemency warrant that made the pardon. Quote, "For any offenses against the United States for which he may have committed or taken part in during the period from January 1st, 2014 through the date of this pardon arising from or in any matter related to his service as director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, as a member of the White House Coronavirus Task Force or the White House COVID-19 response team, or as chief medical advisor to the president," end quote. The president is supposed to issue a pardon to correct what he views as an injustice, and the pardon is therefore personal to him, but there is no evidence that President Biden reviewed all 39 pardons he issued that day, including several family members and the entire select committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. This all raises the question of whether the pardon is constitutionally valid. One other question I have is that if he has been pardoned, why is he afraid to testify and answer simple questions? Why is he afraid? What is he afraid of? But I guess nothing screams out innocence as loudly as taking the fifth. The answer, I believe, is that he would have to admit mass murder if he answered truthfully, and the new unpardoned crime of perjury if he lied. In conclusion, In conclusion, folks, I want to close with a few lines from Paul Craig Roberts. Quote, "The virus was a man-made virus. The work to make the virus easily spreadable was funded by Fauci, first at a North Carolina university, then in Wuhan, China. The virus was meant to be deadly, but it was not. As a backup human extermination tool, a deadly vaccine was created and mandated by ignorant, corrupt governments and employers, including the Biden Secretary of Defense," end quote. This information has been extensively, thoroughly documented. Books such as Soren Kierkegaard's The New September 11th and Tom Wood's Diary of a Psychosis come to mind as examples of extensive documentation. Finally, folks, this is a vitally important case for the future of our country. Once again, from Mr. Roberts, quote, "Clearly in our stupidity and our ignorance, we are not safe. Soon there will be a second attack on us." Bill Gates gloats about it. At least that's the way I see it, folks. Until next time, this is Darrell Castle. Thanks for listening.